Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our virtual Sunday service at Unity on the River for June 7th. I'm Rev Ogun Holder, and so thrilled you took the time to watch our service today. Let's begin with a center-in prayer. So I invite you to, in this moment, simply close the eyes, take a breath, perhaps put hands on the heart to center in. And in this moment, we affirm our oneness. We affirm the unity that exists between each and every one of us on this planet. And we claim and call forth that divine power of love. Our founder, Charles Fillmore, described it as the Great Harmonizer. And in a world which we have noticed this week and the week before more than ever, there is a call for harmony. There is a call for love to be expressed. There is that call for oneness to be made manifest. So we hold that, we pray that, we see it to be true, and then we step out and inspire divine action to make it so. And so it is, and so let it be. Amen and amen. As always, we have a great service planned. We got a group of fabulous musicians that you know so well, our music director, Meg Rain and Lynn Taylor. We've got Keith and Brian in the shed, and join us today is Sherry. So good to see all of you. Looking forward to your music today. So today we're going to take a break from the series around When Things Fall Apart, the book we were studying by Pema Chedron. In light of the recent protests and events in our nation and around the world, I thought it would be a little more poignant to talk around the issues of racial inequality and how we as spiritual people can find our place in bringing the peace and harmony we know is what we all want to experience. And it's also Pride Month. This is the month of June. So I invited a good friend of mine, Dr. Joel Brown. This is his wheelhouse. He has worked with Fortune 500 companies, nonprofits, government organizations, and agencies around topics of leadership, LGBTQ inclusion, interpersonal and intercultural dialogue, and around issues of racism, implicit bias, microaggressions, allyship, you name it in this area. He has talked about it, taught about it, and invited people higher in consciousness and in action. So I'm really thrilled to have him. It's going to be an interview style format, and he will be with us for a few Sundays as we delve into this issue. Towards the end of the month or next month, he's also going to be facilitating a workshop, which I really invite you all to consider participating in. We are the ones who get to bring about the change we want to see. And let's be clear, we don't always know how to do that. So he's here to help us. But until he comes on, we will proceed with our service as usual, with some great music, with some time of centering meditation to open our hearts in order to truly hear his wisdom. So let us begin by heading to the shed with Brian. Nope, Keith. Keith's singing. Keith's giving us a solo today. So take it away, Keith.
Good morning and happy Sunday, everybody. I'm singing a song called The Power of Love, written by a friend of mine from the late 80s. The song, my friend's name is Don Rhodes. So this goes out to Don. Blessed are you when you don't have much to say. And blessed are you when you feel like you've lost your way. And blessed are you when you're misunderstood and words the earth. The time is now. You got things to do with your life, but you don't know how. You can let your light shine from the hill when you connect to the light from above. You can do it all when you live in the power of love. You can do it all when you live in the power of love. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the pure at heart, for they shall see God. They shall see God. Blessed are the ones who sacrifice. Blessed are the ones who serve. Blessed are you when you live in the power of love. Blessed are you when you live in the power of love. Consider those birds in the air, see how they fly. Consider those lilies in the field, they don't even try. In the middle of the riddle of good and bad, just give your heart to the dove. Like a bird or a flower, you can live in the power of love. We can do it all when we live in the power of love. We can save the world when we live in the power of love. Blessed are you when you live in the power of love. We'll transform the world when we live in the power of love. Like a bird or a flower, you can live in the power of. Blessed are you when you live in the power of. We will heal the world when we live in the power of. Blessed are you when you live in the power of love.
Thank you, Keith. Keith sang about love, and I'm going to sing about gratitude. I'm grateful we're in a place where we can sit and talk and get to know what makes us us. Thank you for helping us to understand. Thank you. I want to say thank you. Thank you. Thank you, 'cause I'm so grateful, so grateful, oh grateful, I'm so grateful, and I want to say thank you for this day, Spirit, thank you for this day. Thank you for this day, Spirit, thank you for this day. This healing, this healing, this healing day. This healing, this healing, this healing day. Thank you for this day, Spirit, thank you for this day. Thank you for this day, Spirit, thank you for this day. This healing, this healing, this healing day. This healing, this healing, this healing day. Thank you for this day, Spirit, thank you for this day. Thank you for this day, Spirit, thank you for this day. This beautiful, this beautiful, this beautiful day. This beautiful, this beautiful, this beautiful day. Thank you for my friends, Spirit, thank you for my friends. Thank you for my friends, Spirit, thank you for my friends. my wonderful, my wonderful, my wonderful friends. My wonderful, my wonderful, my wonderful friends. Now thank you for this day, spirits, thank you for this day. Thank you for this day, spirits, thank you for this day. This healing, this healing, this healing day. This healing, this healing, this healing day. I want to say thank you for this day, spirits, thank you for this day. Thank you for this day, spirits, thank you for this day. This healing, this beautiful day. This beautiful, this beautiful, this beautiful day. I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you for grounding us in that energy of gratitude. So I'm going to invite you to find a comfortable place and prepare for a time of meditation. Megan Lynn will take us in with a song called I Dream of Rain, and then I'm going to center the meditation around calling forth that divine power of love, the great harmonizing force that underlies truly everything, that when we choose to live from that place, our actions are around harmonizing. I will be reading some affirmations from Divine Audacity, a book about the 12 powers by Reverend Linda Martella Whitsitt. As I was thumbing through it this week to find things to center myself, this brought me back home to my center. So I invite you guys to just center in as Meg and Lynn tell us about the rain. I dreamed of rain.
So now we think about forgiveness in this song. I dreamed of rain and the rain came, soft and easy, sweet and clear. I dreamed of rain and the rain came, and peace spread over the land. I dreamed of summer and the winds changed, and the green was easy and the rivers ran clear. I dreamed of summer and the winds changed, and peace spread over the land. And the flowers bloom in the desert, and the air is fresh and clear. I dreamed of rain and the rain came, and peace spread over the land. I dreamed of freedom and the moon rose, and the way was easy and the path was clear. I dreamed of freedom and the moon rose, and peace spread over the land. And the guardian stars are shining, and the night is bright and clear. I dreamed of freedom and the moon rose, and peace spread over the land. I dreamed of heaven and the earth sang, and the sound was easy and the song was clear. I dreamed of heaven and the earth sang, peace spread over the land. And the ancient pain is forgotten, and the Father's steps are clear. I dreamed of heaven and the earth sang, and peace spread over the land. And peace spread over the land.
So let us further center in this moment by gently closing the eyes if we've not done so yet. Placing one or both hands on our hearts and breathe into the heart space. Focus your attention on your heart and your breath. Center into that symbolic center of the divine love that is the true nature of who we are. Simply breathe. And should you find yourself distracted by thought or sound, simply notice without attachment, without disappointment, and return to the heart center and the breath. And as we breathe, let us center in the truth of these words. I am the power of love. I am the power of love. Divine love is my name and true nature. I know that the well of love can never run dry, for the source of love is eternal. Under the influence of divine love, I awaken to more love than I have ever known, than I have ever been. I call forth from within me the harmonizing power of love. Love harmonizes my thoughts, my words, and actions, so that I see things rightly and bring about good. I see myself, others, and all conditions through the lens of harmonizing love. I express love by seeing the good in all. I see myself in others, others in myself, and God in us all. For I am one. I am the power of love. Let us hold that truth for a few moments in the silence. I am the power of love. Divine love is my name and true nature. Love harmonizes my thoughts, words, and actions so that I see things rightly and bring about good. I am the power of love. Let us hold this truth in this moment, in every moment, as we walk through our day, our week. And let us know that when we live that power of love, the presence of God is known, is felt, is seen. We are the power of love. We are the presence of God. Let us end this time of meditation as we sing together, Surely the Presence.
Surely the presence of the Lord is in this place. I can feel God's mighty power and God's grace. There's a holy hush around us. I see glory on each face. Surely the presence of the Lord is in this place. Surely the presence of the Lord is in this place. I can feel God's mighty power and God's grace. There's a holy hush around us. I see glory on each face. Surely the presence of the Lord is in this place.
So when it comes to a lot of the issues that are up for us as a society right now, when we speak of racial inequalities, racial justice, how do some of you handle what is becoming an awakening for you all about white privilege and microaggressions? What is all ours to do? How can we be allies for each other? There is only one person that I thought of that would be a great person to introduce to you guys that will cover all those bases and then some. We'd actually been talking since last year about bringing him here to do some workshops, and it turns out that now that we are limited to Zoom, it's turned out to be a much more easier thing to work out. I've known him since
a long time.
It's been a while. Probably 2009, 8, something like, no, 7, probably 7. No, before that, because
I think 2007.
Maybe 2007 when I was living in Kansas City, and despite his long list of accomplishments and achievements, they're in the newsletter, they're on the website. I met him at a Centers for Spiritual Living event when he was dropping some rhymes, because he's also a spoken word artist. And we instantly connected. I invited him to the school I was teaching at, but I'm proud to call him a friend. He's one of my people. I want to introduce to you Dr. Joel Brown. Welcome to Virtual Unity on the River.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. And actually, we've known each other since 2003. Does that make you feel old now?
2003? Wait, how is that possible?
Because I moved to the Bay Area in 2005, and I met you before I moved. So 2003 is when I met you.
All right, yeah. we're gonna talk about this offline, because I didn't move to Kansas City till 2004.
Yeah.
So anyways, maybe you were just coming back for an event. Regardless of the fact, it's been a while. And Joel, knowing Joel has been an education for me in so many ways. So we are going to be talking for a few weeks because there's so much to cover. There's no way we're going to get it all into just, you know, this 20-25-minute talk. And we are in conversation. We'll set up a workshop later that folks can even get more hands-on experience with what you're going to share. But as we were talking about it, and I said, you know, I also want to talk about things around Pride as well, since it's Pride Month. You reminded me that this work of protesting, this is not unique to the Black story. This is a story that the LGBT community knows so very well as well, and in so many ways, the path of people of color and the LGBT community who have been simultaneously first overlap and disenfranchised for so long. It's a story that we can all resonate with. So why don't we start there? I don't know if you want to open up with telling us a little bit more about who you are and what you do now, and
Sure.
then let's branch into that. Start there.
Sure. I don't even know where to begin, but first of all, it's a pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you for making space for me. I own a consulting firm in the Bay Area, and we do a lot of work around culture change, leadership, and transformation for organizations, communities, and companies. And we focus a lot on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I also am a professor at the ESX School of Management in Paris in Lille, France. So I've had the honor of working abroad and talking to and supporting young minds there. I've traveled to about 44 countries at this point. Doesn't feel like it's a lot. And I'm also part of New Thought. So I think New Thought, frankly, is what really helped me to begin my own personal ascension to realizing my dreams and becoming more self-actualized. So we got that out the way. What I would say is that this is a really rich time to be a human being. And I say that because there's so much asking us to grow. There's so much that is pushing us to look at ourselves more deeply, both from an individual standpoint and from a collective standpoint. And so whether we're talking about COVID, whether we're talking about you know, some of the protests around police brutality and racism, which we're going to get into, it is also Pride Month. So I want to say happy Pride to all the members of the LGBTQ community, as well as our allies. It's a really wonderful time to be human, because I think this very time is asking us to step more into our humanity. And I think that's something that we've been able to perhaps avoid. And there have been other things to distract us. And I think that's squarely the question that's before us right now, is how do we become more human, and how do we become more connected? How do we recognize that everything that happens is an extension of who we are, that we're all connected? So that's where we are. In terms of our conversation earlier about protests, that's also fascinating to me, because I grew up in an era where I didn't grow up in the 60s, but I certainly grew up at a time where protests was still happening more frequently. And certainly with my travels to places like Europe and elsewhere, you still see a lot more protests in other places than you do in the US. I actually get concerned about our level of civic engagement and our level of protest, because it's so easy just to like something on Facebook or to recycle an article on social media. And that is certainly a form of protest, but I don't think that is really the type of protest and engagement that is needed for us right now in order to really deal with some of the endemic institutional issues that we're facing. And
so let me jump in and ask you about that, because some would say, and I've said this as well, that any sort of engagement is better than no engagement at all, because we've seen it said that, you know, silence is supporting the systemic racism, white silence especially, and that's not my original thought. That's straight out of Martin Luther King Jr.'s mouth. So there are folks who, and I've invited folks to find your lane. like whether it is on social media, whether it is making calls or writing your congressman, whether it is going out protesting, find your lane, but at least be in a lane and not just like, you know, parked out on the curb. So speak a little bit more to what you're saying, that it's not enough at this time, just being, you know, throwing up hashtags, reposting, what, speak more to that.
Well, I think part of, and this is going to cross over into some of the spiritual realm too, and I'm sure you won't mind that, but
No, please do.
part of protest and part of demonstration really is asking us, it's really us saying to the collective society, there's a need for growth. But growth can't take place when it's simply just externalized. Growth must also take place from an internal standpoint. In fact, when I do my work, when I'm working with clients, I typically will say to them, yes, it's wonderful that you want to reach out to more African Americans. It's wonderful that you want to be more inclusive of LGBTQ people. It's wonderful that you want to create more inclusive space for women. But there's an internal piece that has to start first. And so when I'm talking about activism, what I'm also talking about is the need to activate oneself. Not simply just to pass on information, not simply just to like something, not simply just to be passive in the process, but what are you doing to activate yourself and to push and elevate your own consciousness and your own vibration so that you fully understand these issues, but not that you just understand them, but that you're also working to eradicate them. So I certainly don't tell people how to engage. Everybody has a different comfort level. I have been in the streets. I have definitely protested. And there's some who have done a lot more than I have, just to be very candid with you. At the same time, though, there's a level of protest and engagement that not only requires you to look at yourself or to look at institutions and to speak truth to power and to show more courage about challenging what's already out there, the norms, the practices, the policies, and the behaviors that we see in society, but also to say, what do I need to do for myself in order to be elevated? What do I need to do for myself in order to change how I think and how I do things? And I think just by the nature of our society with social media and whatnot, sometimes there's a lot of voyeurism that we think is our own activism. And I don't think that's activism. I don't think me simply just recycling an article, certainly that is a part of it. But I think the times require us to do more. And so what I'm basically asking for people to do is to show some more personal leadership. And that's what I mean when I talk about protest and demonstration. There's a personal leadership aspect there that must be activated for us to really change society for the better.
Okay, thanks.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does make sense. I got a little. I was processing what you were just saying. That's why I had that like frozen in headlights moment there for a moment.
I would also say to you too, since we're talking about protests, and I don't even like to use the term protest because once again, I don't want to focus on that which I don't want, which is what protest is. I'd rather focus on what I do want. So I support, or like the terminology of a rally or an uprising. What I will say to you though is that our country, whether it's around the labor movement, whether it's from the legacy of the 60s, whether it's from slavery, I mean, there's always been quote unquote demonstrations, rallies, and protests. What I think is interesting though is that we haven't always recognized and supported those events when it comes to African Americans. So we're okay with there, for example, being demonstrations when it occurs to other people. And so, for example, this is Pride Month, as we already referenced, and Pride began as an uprising. I don't know how many people remember that. So last year was the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, which is when the modern LGBTQ movement began in 1969 at the Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village of New York. But that was an uprising. And now, surprisingly, that was an uprising that was based on police brutality. The Stonewall Inn was a drinking establishment that was owned by the mafia. It had been purchased by the mafia, the Genovese family, in 1966. It used to be a straight bar. They then decided to rebrand it as a gay bar because they figured they could make some money. They didn't put any money into the plumbing. There was not, the toilets didn't work well. They were overflowing. There was no water behind the bar to wash the dishes and the glasses. They had poor ventilation. but they also knew that there was a community there desiring to have more community and more connection with each other. So that's how the Stonewall began as a LGBTQ institution. And for the most part, the police left the institution or the bar alone. And if they were going to engage in a raid, they tipped them off. They would let the owners know, we're coming on this night. And that gave people an opportunity to leave or to not be there because, of course, at that time, it was still not safe to be LGBTQ. And in fact, a number of people were fearful of being blackmailed. But there came a point where the police were starting to harass the patrons more and more. And so then on the evening of June 28th, in 1969, people finally said, we've had enough. And that movement was led by people of color, but particularly transgender people and queer folk and drag queens in the community. And so if you watch some of the accounts of Stonewall, you'll see this very stylized, romanticized Hollywood version, which eradicates or eliminates any talk of people of color, trans people, people who are gender nonconforming, people who are sex workers, and people who are drag queens. But it was the quote unquote undesirables to whom we owe much of the credit for the rebellion and for the state of LGBTQ affairs today. So that's the beginning of Pride, and that's how LGBTQ people have started this long and difficult journey to emancipation. But what I would say to you is that protest and demonstration have been around forever. There were slave revolts. There were, and sometimes I think with our history and the way it's being taught, there's this idea that Black people just were just sad and downtrodden for years until all of a sudden in the 60s, we had some magical prophet known as Dr. Martin Luther King, God rest his soul, who came and rescued us. And although Dr. King is pivotal to our movement, that's been a steady part of who we are. The question is, why does America at times have a problem with Black people speaking up and with Black people demanding more of America and saying that we are not going to take what's being given to us laying down? And so then, the focus becomes on looting and things that really have nothing to do with the underlying causes that sponsored the rebellions and the demonstrations and the rallies and the riots. That's problematic. But this is riots and demonstrations and rallies are just as American as apple pie. And I hope that we continue to see it, obviously not the destruction, that's incidental, but people finding their voice, right? Because that's what it's really about, is people not relying on government leaders and other people to show their power or to lend them or to give them permission to use their power. People saying, I'm going to take my own power to force change and to create a society that works for everyone. I'm hoping we can get back to that because I think we definitely need it. We haven't needed it in the last 4 years. I don't know when else we would need it.
Exactly. You said something there that about at Stonewall that particular night, there was that sense of, we've had enough.
Absolutely.
And many people have commented about how there's a bit of that sort of energy around this particular time. This is not the first time a Black person died or a person of color died at the hands of law enforcement. This year, this quarter,
this week, yeah,
exactly. Like we know of, part of I think what lent itself to this was, George Floyd, and shortly before him, Breonna Taylor, and then shortly before her, we saw the video from Ahmaud Arbery's murder as well, and on a short space of time, and that landed on top of a lot of pent up frustration around how the powers that be are handling this pandemic, and people are out of work, and there's stuck at home, and it's like this perfect storm that happened for things to boil up. But I'll be honest with you, excuse me, I hear people say that, and there's a part of me that almost struggles to connect with hope around this situation of it being different, and because we said so in the past,
Sure.
and there's been some signs that things finally might be beginning to turn, and one example is, in recent articles I've been reading about cities looking at the budget for their law enforcement departments and pulling back some of those funds because, some of it was assigned to maintain paramilitary strength with tanks and stuff like that, or to be more accurate, like armored personnel vehicles that are roaming down the streets,
Right.
to protect against some sort of incursion. And we have a military. The police are not military, so they're pulling back those budgets. We're seeing things, other things along those lines as well. So there's a piece of me. It's like, okay, maybe this really kind of is. Can you speak a little bit towards the fatigue that Black people of color have felt for decades, not just because the anger and frustration is evident, but what we don't talk a lot about is the fatigue that comes from being on the receiving end of systemic injustice. It doesn't just fatigue you emotionally and physically, but it robs you of your spirit. And it's been fascinating to, over the years, have conversations with people of color in the New Thought movement, which is designed around finding that inexhaustible source of inner strength, because it is God. And at the same time, we have the system that is just wearing us out. What are your thoughts around all that?
Oh, we don't have enough time to talk about that. I guess that's what we're going to be talking over the next few weeks. The exhaustion is real. I mean, people have asked me, for example, over the last 10 days, how are you feeling? And it's a minute by minute experience. 1 minute I'm feeling sadness, the next minute I'm feeling rage, the next minute I'm feeling utterly exhausted. Some minutes I'm sad, others I'm defiant. It's, I kind of look at it this way. So a lot of people have cellular devices now. If you don't, you may be fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you look at it. But this is what I say to people. Sometimes you can look at your cell phone device and you don't recognize that the battery is being drained. And then you look and you say, oh, there's an app that's open, or maybe there's a feature on the phone that I've not closed out, but it's draining the battery. Unbeknownst to you, that is what it's like to be Black in the United States, or frankly, in the world. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But it's having this ethos, this negative energy around you that you constantly have to contend with, that is constantly draining your battery emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and physically. And it's very difficult. The reaction now is radically different than it was in 1992 when I had my first, well, I won't say my first, but I had there was a collective wake-up call around police brutality, and that was with Rodney King. And, at the time, there wasn't this reaction, and the people who were marching and protesting were mostly Black. And to your point, I've had to remind people that these things have been going on for quite some time. And the question that I would ask of the audience and everybody I come across is, if there were no camera or video, would you believe what took place?
One of the powerful things, a quote that was attributed to Will Smith, I honestly don't know if he actually said it, but he said, racism isn't getting worse, it's just getting filmed. And I think, thank God for that. Otherwise, we still don't know all the injustices that happen in the world with as much filming that's happening right now. So that is a good thing. And the flip side of that is, for me, it adds to the exhaustion of, the last couple of weeks, everything on the news. Like, we've forgotten there's a pandemic almost. Every day on the news, we've been seeing stories about this on the phone, in the social media feeds. Both a good thing in terms of awakening awareness, awakening America, especially white America, to the truth and reality of the situation. And at the same time, for me, and I'm sure for many others, regardless of the color of their skin, I know for me, as a Black person, it's kind of been overload, exhausting, adding to the exhaustion to continue to see these horrible stories. And it's weird, but there's a piece of me that now is like, okay, I got to really manage my time and my energy. I don't want to shut it off because it needs to be seen. And I think a lot of times, unfortunately, our spiritual teachings get misunderstood in a way that tells us, you know, don't look at the outer, turn within. Or our job is to like spiritually, metaphysically see it right, but we're not supposed to go out there and be a force to set it right. That's kind of been a teaching that is misunderstood, and I've been saying to people over the years, no, that's not it. It's about we don't react from the initial raw emotion that comes up. We take it into the heart, we take it into the silence, and we discern truly what's ours to do. But there is a doing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I would say to you too, on top of that, you know, yes, I firmly believe that we are all spiritual beings having an earthly experience, but we don't get to ignore the fact that we are having an earthly experience. I mean, that's in service of us teaching ourselves about something, once again, individually and collectively. And what I referenced earlier was this idea that when people get into these ideas of these illusions of separation, that, oh, what's happening over here doesn't really impact me, or even I'm going to close my eyes and be oblivious and just shut it off because I want to maintain this purity of thought and whatnot. That type of spiritual bypassing is not going to lead to spiritual growth. And I call it more spiritual deception, because we're basically cutting ourselves off to the truth of what's really happening to us, because what's happening to one person is also happening to me. We've all co-created this reality, right? So if I tell myself or try to say that, well, that's happening over there, then what I'm shutting myself off to is not only the pain that I myself am experiencing and also probably causing, but also to the growth and the comeuppance that I can also experience as well by attending to that, as you said, in a thoughtful, strategic, and loving way. And that's what we're being called to do right now, is to show up in a more loving way. So when I go to a demonstration, as I went to on Wednesday, and I'm one of, let's say, very few Black people in the crowd, and it was kind of surreal to me. What I'm realizing and what makes me hopeful, because you said that you're wondering if this is going to be the tipping point of anything will change. What makes me hopeful is that, number one, people are realizing that this isn't just about Black people. This is a human movement. It is about Black people, but it's also about people doing their own work to liberate themselves and to grow and to be the best version of themselves, because they're realizing, I can't exist and separate my own journey and struggle because it's tied to yours. Your liberation is tied to mine. So that's been wonderful to see. I don't know what this is going to do. I mean, I think a lot of commentators and talking heads have made a lot of, it wasted a lot of energy talking about what is 2020 going to represent. I think it's far too soon. But to your point of how do you deal with it? If we don't have hope, what do we have left? If we don't have some intentionality, what do we have left? If we don't have purpose right now, what do we have left? Because the reality is dire as things look right now, the reality is things have been worse. Things have certainly been much worse. You and I, you know, maybe 50, well, not maybe, as recently as maybe 30, 40 years ago, even maybe 20 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, would not be able to have these open conversations about anti-racism, white supremacy. Those things were not being discussed. I just as recently as last year was in Seattle having a conversation about white supremacy. And just in case some people on this, during the service are getting triggered hearing that term, there's a difference between white people, white supremacists, and white supremacy. And just so you understand, there are people of color who also perpetuate white supremacy. That's coming up in our future talks in the next couple of weeks. I couldn't have that I was in a room of thought leaders in Seattle, and they were getting triggered by that term white supremacy. So think about how radically things have shifted just within a year, less than a year, where we're now able to talk about healing and anti-racism and white supremacy, and talking about how we can proactively dismantle this system and looking at other forms of policing, defunding the police. And I guess I should say too, in case anybody wonders, I have law enforcement in my family, and I certainly know for a fact that there are a number of police officers who are law-abiding, who are doing wonderful things, who care about the communities. But we're talking about a system into which people are asked to work and operate that is inherently racist. And when I say inherently racist, it's designed to devalue and to subjugate and to dismiss the lives, needs, and sensibilities and experiences of Black people in favor of the norms, beliefs, and sensibilities of white people. That is the very nature of racism. And so hopefully, you know, I think probably next week we'll talk a little bit more about what racism is, because we need to get beyond the one-dimensional Webster version dictionary of racism and talk about it in a more complex way, because it is, to me, one of the biggest global phenomena. It is one of the biggest threats to our planet right now, because what's happening here in the United States is happening in Brazil, it's happening in France, it's happening in the UK, Hungary, Russia, Turkey, the Philippines. This authoritarianism, which is being cloaked in not just white supremacy and racism, but also sexism, heterosexism, ableism, classism. All of it's tied together. Nativism is all tied together. So we're really just looking at one part of the constellation, and we need to be able to see all of it if we're really going to do anything about it. So that's my hope. And
so before we wrap up,
yeah.
And I know you say we're going to talk about it next week, but I actually want to have you touch on it briefly before you go, is the explanation of what racism is, because there are many folks who would say, well, you know, when we are seeing the police brutality, when we're seeing the overt and visible elements of racism, and we are horrified because that's not how we think, that's not what we believe, that's not what we do.
Mm-hmm.
But then you say, you know, we have white privilege, or racism is still in place as a power that supports who we are by default.
Mm-hmm.
It can get confusing for folks, because it sounds to some of my white friends, for example, have said, you're labeling me and putting me in a box that I don't think I'm in. So I realized part of the issue was, you're right, there maybe is not a clear and both broader and specific definition and understanding of what racism is. So can you, from your point of view, from your work, from your experience, begin to speak about that, and that's sort of where we'll wrap up the conversation. But
we're done already? Wow, we have so much more to discuss.
That's why you're coming back.
Right.
I tell you, we can do it in one sitting.
Yeah, so racism has to be looked at different levels. There's individual racism, there's interpersonal racism, there's institutional racism. There is intentional racism, there's unintentional racism, there's conscious racism, there's unconscious racism. All of it is racism, though. And so racism, in a nutshell, is placing your cultural frame, your values, and your norms as central to the understanding of the world, and expecting and demanding that other people operate in a similar fashion. So let me give you an example of that. Recently, there was a conversation with the NFL, which I haven't watched in several years, where I think it was Drew Brees, who's the quarterback for the New Orleans Saints, and he was saying, when I see the flag, he said, I object to people kneeling during the Pledge of Allegiance, because when I see the flag, I see my grandparents and my grandfathers and how they fought for freedom. They fought for the betterment of this country. Now, for Mr. Brees, that is wonderful. I'm glad that when he sees a flag, that's what he sees, and that's what he feels, and he feels patriotic. What is racist is that Mr. Brees is appalled and is angry because others dare have a different vision or view of the American flag, thereby placing, once again, his experience as the key experience and negating the experiences of other people. I haven't stood for the flag I haven't stood for the flag since I was in high school, probably in middle school. Not because I have anything against the flag. I haven't burned it. I won't desecrate it. I won't be disruptive during the Pledge of Allegiance, but because it represents to me something entirely different. It represents to me a country that does not live up to its promises, and in fact is built upon broken promises and mythology that has placed some people at a certain level or given them certain privileges, rights, and benefits, and has denied those same rights, benefits, and privileges to other people, including LGBTQ people, including African American people. Now, someone may say, well, what place in the world do you know has been perfect? I'm not demanding that people, that the United States be perfect, but I am demanding that it be accountable. And until it starts being accountable, and until it starts to work in good faith and be earnest in what it's doing, I have a hard time standing for that. And to be fair, there are places around the world that I think are dealing with race and gender identity and sexuality and a host of other issues in a much better way than we are in the United States. I mean, I think part of the myth that we have here is that we are, America, we're the best and we do everything. I always say to people, travel a little bit. We certainly aren't the worst, but I don't even think that designation is important. But there's some things that I think we could learn from other people and we haven't learned. So racism is not about whether you like Black people, whether you are comfortable with people of color, whether you know anybody. It's about understanding how you engage with them, and are you able to show cultural humility and recognize that there are other views, frames, and perspectives out there that are equally valid, and that you're making room for those perspectives to show up, and that you're recognizing the historical nature of injustice and how it has impacted the outcomes that we have today. Because everybody living today, the world that we live in is a product of racism. Racism, the United States did not begin in 1776, it began in 1619. And I think people need to understand that.
Travel and education are perhaps the two most important things. I agree with you. I only, in the last couple of years, learned the true story behind the Trail of Tears, for example. Some people may not even know what that is. Some people know, oh, it's when the government force relocated hundreds and thousands of Native Americans from the South and put them on reservations. I only recently learned, because again, I'm from Barbados, we didn't do American history, and then when I got here, it's still, the public face is still very sanitized. I learned this because of the time I spent in the Native American Museum in DC. That forced relocation was 100% to get farmland, to bring in slaves to work, to create the economy on which the US was built. And that kind of blew my mind. I literally thought it was because, the powers that be just wanted to put down the Native American uprisings and steal land. And I thought it was just a straight up sort of like discrimination in that way. But I was like, no, this was a master plan to create an economy based on slave labor. And that rocked my world. Since then I've been like, what else don't I know? Right. So you're right. The education, the traveling, to see how other people and places live and treat each other. I was sharing, a friend of mine who I grew up with in Barbados made a powerful post I shared recently, which is, Barbados was a British colony and territory. We only gained our independence recently in the 60s. And so there was that systemic racism that really, really mostly showed up in economic and class ways as well. And that has turned around in the last 40 years tremendously. But the thing she said that was important was, even in the midst of all of that, because it's a country that's like 95% Black people, as a child, everybody in a place of authority I saw was Black. Right. All our government leaders were Black, law enforcement was Black, teachers were Black, priests were Black. Everybody was Black. So so when you aspired to be something or someone that you're looking at in your own country, they were Black as well. And there's a piece of me that honestly cannot relate to, for example, the experience of maybe someone like you who's Black in America and was born here and lived here, because because the general narrative is not to you know, unless in the last 10, maybe even 5 years, truly promote, even within Black communities, Black people as those who look to and admire. And that does a whole job on your sense of self, your psyche. And so sort of bring it full circle back to that place of exhaustion. It all plays a part. And when we say systemic, that's what we mean.
Absolutely.
Systemic means that in every piece of the operating culture and the operating way of being, this is woven into it. You can't, you know, there's no part that this doesn't play a part.
Right. I think Malcolm X talked about it a little bit. I'll paraphrase what he said, but imagine, and fortunately I grew up in a family and in a neighborhood where Black excellence was normalized, and being Black was seen as something healthy and good and positive, but I also had to leave that house every single day. I think I'll go back to what Malcolm X said, where he said, imagine growing up in a society where you're told that you're less than, you're told that you know, and you're getting messages all the time. We live in a container where we're getting these messages all the time. And then let's say you lose your job, or you're looking for housing, or you can't get good health care or whatnot. And then on top of all that, and then the people who are in control of these things are people who don't look like you and are people who are white, and therefore that's normalized. But then when you've exhausted all human remedy, when you said, okay, I've done all I can, now I'm going to appeal to something spiritual, something religious. And then you walk into a church and even your God, your Lord and Savior is white. And so even there, you know, in the otherworldly sense, you're being told that somehow you don't exist, or that you are less than, or that somehow you are not idealized even by God, him, her, or itself. That's pretty profound. So that is the nature of racism. And so to the extent that when we capitulate, when we don't agitate, when we don't activate ourselves, as we talked about earlier, then what you're doing is you're supporting a system that continues to produce what it has. And that's what a system is. A system is, it is a closed, a system operates to produce the very results that it produces, that it's designed to produce the very results that it has. And if you don't agitate and disrupt what's here within the United States and also abroad, because I don't want to let off my friends in Europe and South America and Asia and Africa, because there's totally racism over there, but we're just talking about the US context. If you don't disrupt it, then it continues to perpetuate itself, and then you continue to have what it is. And so unless you're openly disrupting that and you're being vigilant about pushing back against that, then you are still helping to maintain a racist system in which some people are going to win, and a lot of us, particularly those of us of a darker hue, are certainly going to lose.
Yes, and I want to stress to the folks who are watching and listening, part of this is the awareness of it.
Sure.
You may not have known that you were benefiting from this system. You may not have known that you were inherently propping up this system. The question becomes, as I always say, this is not about sharing this information so then you can feel guilty or beat up on yourself. It's like, now what do I do about this? If I ask myself, is this the system I want to maintain, or is this a system that needs to be dismantled? Where is my part? What is my part? What do I do? So in the next couple of weeks, we're going to continue this conversation. If there was any part of this that was remotely uncomfortable for you, see it as a good thing.
Absolutely.
Because change is not comfortable. And being forced to look at ourselves, especially to realize for some of us that yes, we have been unintentionally and unconsciously supported a system that results in horrible outcomes, and that's not who we are. It is a little bit of a disconnect, a little bit of a schism, and a little bit of difficulty look at, and look at it you must. When Gandhi said, "Be the change we wish to see," this is what he's talking about. We have to be that change. We have to look at it, and I know you're capable of it as well. So thank you, Joel, for being with us. It looks like the storm is raging outside. If you hear that background noise. Storm.
I was wondering what was happening there.
Heavens are open. I got my windows open because it's nice weather. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for be willing to join me in opening up this conversation. And let's be clear, it's a point of challenge for me as well as a Black minister in a predominantly white community that has been nothing but loving and supportive of who I am. And I'm very grateful to be in that place. And it's still a discussion we have to have.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate you. I appreciate the work you're doing.
Back at you.
And we will see you next week.
Next time. Same bad time, same bad channel.
There we go. Before we enjoy some more music by Brian and Keith and our music team, I just want to share a few announcements for the week and beyond. First of all, I invite you to sign up for Gina Jeunesse class, Empathy and Compassion in These Challenging Times. I've had a lot of conversations with folks online and on the phone, and that question of how do we change things? What do I do keeps coming up, and of course it all begins with our inner work. This is a 3-part class that starts on June 15th and is built on the principles of nonviolent communication. And in this class, Gina will help us learn to accept our feelings and express ourselves with empathy and compassion, as well as apply it to others who are grieving and under stress even more now over the last couple of weeks. So please, I invite you to sign up for this class as a way to broaden your toolkit for how to be a spiritual presence in times such as these. Also, Spirit Groups is going virtual as we continue to be safe by not meeting in large group or even maybe small groups right now. We acknowledge that we still want experiences of connection with our spiritual family, and Spirit Groups is a way for that to happen. It's going to be virtual, yes, and we are going to be looking at that foundational unity text, Discover the Power Within You. Many of you are familiar with it. Many probably already have the book on your shelf. But no matter how well you think you know this, I'm going to invite you into joining a Spirit Group and being with other members of the community, whether you belong to Unity or on the River or beyond. Spirit Groups are open to everyone. What we will need, however, are some folks to host these virtual small group gatherings. So if you're interested in hosting a Spirit Group over Zoom, please go to unityontheriver.org/Spirit Groups, or just click the Spirit Groups tab on our page and find out the information. There's an application form. And if you're thinking, wait, I can barely, take part in a conversation on Zoom, I don't know how to run a group, we'll help you out with some Zoom training. We're hoping to start these Spirit Groups the week of July 19th, but we'll need hosts and train the hosts. So we need you to return that application form to us by June 14th. So you go to our website, download the form, fill it out, print it out, and get it back to us, scan and email it, take a picture of it and email it, whatever works. If you don't have any way to print it out, just email us the information that you would have put in the form. We'll figure out some way to get it done. More questions, the best email address is spiritgroups@unityontheriver.org, and we'll talk some more about that. Really quick, again, Pettingill House is always looking for donations of food and items for those who are really struggling with losing their jobs during this time of coronavirus. Some new drop-off dates are up there, Sunday, June 14th and Tuesday, June 16th. just 2 days. That's not this week, but the following week. Please go to the website and look at the list of items and only bring those items that they have specifically requested for. And speaking of donations, thank you to all of you who continue to financially support us. We really do appreciate your donations during this time that has allowed us to continue to provide this and other services for you. If you'd like to make a donation, visit our website, unityontheriver.org/donate, or you can text. If you want to donate by text, text the word GIVE to 833-702-4337. It's just a one-time setup that way, and it allows you to use a credit card. It allows you to use Apple Pay or Google Pay. But once you set it up to send us a donation, all you got to do is text us the number, and that number is the amount that you want to donate. And after that initial setup, it's like it literally takes less than 15 seconds to send us a donation, and we are grateful for that. We're also grateful, again, as always, for this fantabulous music team. Yes, fantabulous is a word. This fantabulous music team, and we're going to hear some more from them. Turning it over to Brian and Keith, who will now share One Love.
Same scene, played over and over. Same sweet passion, same warm blood. Softly speaking, universal language. So many people, one love might make the difference. Might take the walls and tear them down. One light might keep on shining if we take one love and we spread it around. Religions, new generation, caught in a struggle about a righteous way. Can't see the forest for all the frustrations. So many lying, so many dying, but only one love. One love might make the difference. Might make the walls and tear them down. One light might keep on shining if we take one love and we spread it around. Too many stories weave a common thread. Too many roads traveled all reach the same end. Same scene plays over and over and over now. Same passion, it's the same red blood. Universal language goes unspoken. There's too much hatred now, but only one love. One love just might make the difference. Might take the walls and tear them down. One light might keep on shining if we take one love and we spread it around. One love might make the difference. Might take the walls and tear them down. One light might keep on shining if we take one love and we spread it around. If we take one love and we spread it around. If we take one love, we spread it around.
Yes, let us take that love, the one love that we are as divine beings, and spread it around. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Meg. And before we end with Let There Be Peace on Earth, if you are watching this Sunday morning, join us for virtual hospitality at 11 a.m. or whenever you're done watching this. Join us anytime. We'll be there for the full hour, and all the information is on our website to join that call, unityontheriver.org. So let us end by affirming the truth that we all know: there is peace on earth, and it begins with us.
Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, a peace that was meant to be. With God as creator, family all are we. Let us walk with each other in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my joyous vow. To take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me.
And let us hold in our hearts a prayer for protection. The light of God surrounds us.
We are the light of God.
The love of God enfolds us.
We are the love of God.
The power of God protects us.
We are the power of God.
The presence of God watches over us.
We are the presence of God.
Wherever we are, God is, and all is
All
well.
is well,
And we are richly blessed. Namaste.
Namaste. See you at coffee. Have a blessed day.